Hi, patrons.
Hey, patrons.
Prepare
We
to have
are
your minds
fired up this
blown.
morning.
Yeah, we are fired up.
You don't even know. I mean, you probably do know. I mean, I feel
Yeah,
like we've been on a bender the last couple weeks.
it'll be hard not to be, actually. I
Yeah.
think even
Well, the world is
even
on
doing
fire.
yeah, the world is on fire. Even doing like the suite on disability and accessibility stuff that we were thinking about doing, I'm like, it has now become a much more politically charged topic than it would have been even a year ago when we would have
Yeah.
talked about it anyway, because it's an important topic.
Right.
But like when your whole platform is to make everything a culture war so that people are constantly riled up and you can use that anger to fuel voter support and voter suppression, then like that's going to be your one trick pony. That's all you do is fucking culture war shit. And so anything you can pick at to inflame people, you will.
Right. Yeah. Dude, it's just well, today we're talking about DEI,
Oh yeah,
which is
thank you.
apparently something that has totally inflamed the right. Whenever they hear those letters, they're like they're terrified. They're terrified of letters. They're
Yeah.
terrified of I love I remember when I was a kid, and we won't talk about this on the episode, but I thought it'd be good to talk about this here. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I remember hearing about affirmative action, and the way that it was always framed to me was that like, and maybe this is just because I was around some people that had more right-leaning views, but they were like, well, that just means that just because the color of somebody's skin, like, they'll get a job over somebody who is more qualified. And I was like, I don't know that that's true. Like, that's not really the thing. And I remember, like, the thing that like really got me with that was, like, the thing that I came to understand was that, and I guess maybe this is like when you start understanding how systemic racism works. I was like, so you're gonna hire the white guy that's capped at their potential, like they're well trained, da, 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 or you're gonna hire somebody of color who never had the opportunity and maybe has greater potential, or has greater opportunity, or like has never had the opportunity and is still doing well enough to be considered for that job, but will do better than the white guy that was capped because they just never had the same opportunities. Like, I feel like that was always the thing for me, was going like affirmative action processes make sense because they're giving somebody who never would have gotten the opportunity an opportunity, who could and is more likely better at the job than the white guy who's capped at their skill set.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I came to understand it. And I was like, man, like, and people are mad about that. And then I was like, oh, I know why.
Yeah.
It took me a minute to go back and say, oh, I know why people are mad about that. They're mad about that because they're afraid that it's the great replacement
It
in
is.
just in education. That's what they're worried
It
about.
and that actually I think is another episode I've been wanting to do and come back around to is that whole fucking story, that complete bullshit story. And like they use it in so many places to trick white people, particularly young white men, into believing that that's actually a thing. Um,
Well, young white men are just so fragile.
they really are. But like particularly in the military, like I feel like that's a huge thing is like you're fighting for their freedom, you're gonna come home and it's gonna be all black people running everything and they won't let you get a job and shit like that. I'm like, never has that ever happened or going to happen. Like it's just
Right,
more fucking fear mongering to try and control people.
right. Oh man,
All right,
this world is crazy.
it
You
is.
want to talk about DEI?
Let's talk about DEI. Um, yeah, I think the story in here about how it is used to help rural communities get into college, I think helps illustrate the exact point you were making with affirmative action. Is like
Hmm.
they might not be the most qualified candidate right out the gate because they were never given the opportunity to participate in a system that would have elevated them there in the first place.
Right.
Systemic racist issues held them back from receiving an education and training that would have made them competitive candidates, and
Yeah.
affirmative action gave them a chance to show how well they could do in those spaces, even in the face of all of the systemic racism
Oh,
that had
yeah.
held them back. And they succeeded. Like they did really well in those spaces. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
dude, it's an issue of sexism, racism, ableism, classism. It's all the thing. It's all the isms. And affirmative action was just kind of like, hey, we're just trying to even the playing field. But everybody was
yeah,
like, no.
And that's
Oh
what's crazy is
no.
like the amount of people that this affects positively is so much larger than the amount of people that it might affect adversely. The tiny
Right.
minority of the most advantaged people are the people who then might miss out on opportunities to hold on to and further assemble wealth and power. They won't necessarily be injured by it, but it might be harder for them to maintain that status of like high elitism. But like otherwise, like we're talking about people with disabilities includes people who have hearing loss, people who have vision loss, people who are
Right.
injured, like military veterans, people who have like other injuries or medical complications, people who have maybe have some mental diagnosis like autism, like
Right.
people who women people who are like any minority whatsoever or from any other country than apparently European descent. I'm like, once you have considered like people who are over 50 years old, I'm like, people over 50, women, people who have any melanin in their skin whatsoever, and people who have any kind of disability, like that's most people anymore. Like
Right.
that percentage I just described is most people in the United States. I mean, that's definitely most people around the world, but like that's most people in the United States too.
Right. Right. Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yep. Getting ahead of ourselves because we haven't even hit record yet. But
Patrons will get
the,
a free show.
that's right. I'm getting all my passion worked out so quick. I won't have any left for the I've blown my wad too soon.
That's okay. We'll come back to
Need time to recharge and take a nap.
it. We'll take a nap real quick. We'll be back.
All right. Well, my audio looks good, so I'm ready if you are.
All right. Let's do
I'll
this.
let you finish chewing first.
We should be good.
Okay.
I'll be all right.
Okay. All right, I'll count us down in three, two, one, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your wise policy host, Abraham.
And I'm your infuriated host, Shane. Oh,
We are a psychology podcast. We talk about all of the things that humans and non-human animals do, and sometimes we talk about good ideas that get belittled as bad ideas, even when they're good ideas. And that's the thing that we do here as a show.
no, yeah. So today we were going to talk about DEI. Now, where I would say at the beginning of this that DEI is a very big topic to uncover, and it's a
Yeah.
polarizing topic right now in the world, at least in the United States,
Yeah,
where
definitely
people are
here.
being buttholes about it. So I think what I would say is that we are going to probably talk a lot about kind of the general idea of what DEI is, and there will be several episodes after this that are going to cover specific topics inside of it, policies, procedures, things that we do, belief systems, all that stuff. We're gonna talk about this quite a bit given the current landscape. Because if we're getting banned by our government, then we were probably doing something right.
We're, fair enough. Yeah, we're here to share to unpack some of this. We're going to dive into the history of it and all that sort of thing, and so hopefully you're here for all of that. Hopefully you will learn something you did not know, and walk away with a better understanding and better armed to come to the table with arguments and facts and reason and that sort of thing. But if you are joining us for the first time, welcome. Happy to have you here. Hope that you are into this. You get as much out of this episode as we intend for you to get out of it, or some approximation of that. And if you do end up liking what you hear today, and you would like to support us, you can head over to Patreon and join us there. You can pick up some merch at our merch store. Leave us a rating and review, like, subscribe, tell a friend, do all those things. I'll talk more about that at the end of our discussion today. And you are joining us here on, well, actually, before I even say that, and if you are a returning listener, thanks for coming back. We're happy to have you here, and we hope that you continue to find
Yeah.
value in all the things that we talk about. I always welcome our new listeners, and I sometimes forget that I need to continue to welcome back our returning listeners, which we hope there are many of you. And yeah, thanks for being here. And as I was saying, it is February 26th, which means it is a holiday, and the holiday that we're going to talk about, which is very relevant to today's topic, is Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, and it should be every day. So
Yeah,
just, you know,
they do
but
matter
it
every
is
day.
us. They do matter every day and will always matter. It's also Carnival Day.
It is Carpe Diem Day. I feel that with this topic again.
Yeah, seize the day. It's for Pete's sake day, whoever Pete is.
Sure. It is Inconvenience Yourself Day. Okay.
Okay. It is also Shivaratri.
We did
Maha
not practice
Shivaratri. I
that
should have practiced
beforehand.
beforehand. Yeah, so let me make sure I'm saying it correctly. It is Maha Shivaratri. There we go.
Okay. Uh,
Mhm.
moving on. It is National Customized Wheel and Tire Day.
Sure. It's National Letter to an Elder Day.
Okay. It is National Personal Chef's Day. Oh, I would love a personal chef. That would be
Oh,
fantastic.
same. And I would be so nice to them.
Right? Yeah.
It's National Pistachio Day.
Speaking of personal chefs,
Yeah.
bring on those pistachios. It is
Uh-huh.
Pink Shirt Day. If you weren't already wearing one, now you can.
Yeah, your shirt looks close right now. It's not pink, but it's in that family.
Yeah, it's like yeah, in the red-ish color.
It's yeah, it's within that hue. It's Tell a Fairy Tale Day, which is fun.
Yes, it is Thermos Bottle Day
Ooh, I like that. It is National Energy Week.
and National Chip Week in the UK, which I'm assuming means fries, like
Yeah,
potatoes.
come on, get it right, UK. It should be National Fry Week. It's National Eating Disorders Awareness Week.
Okay, and National Green Week.
And it is National Invasive Species Awareness Week. One of my favorite episodes of The Simpsons is Bart versus Australia, and he brings the bullfrog, and it was like my first introduction to understanding what an invasive species was. So thank you, Simpsons.
I remember that one. That was I think he was also on a mission to discover whether toilets flush the opposite direction in
That's
Australia
how
in
it
that
started.
episode. Yeah, okay.
It started with that. It was a long distance call, and then he ended up racking up a whole bunch of money, and then Australia was mad at him that he owed so much money on a collect call to Australia.
Fun. Um, that's right. That's right. Yeah, Simpsons, good stuff. Well, we are actually not here to talk about Simpsons and really not even here to necessarily unpack the background of all of these holidays, although it's possible some of them will become episode topics at some point. Who knows?
Sure.
But instead, our actual purpose of today's discussion, as we described, is to unpack the history of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or maybe more popularly talked about in the news as DEI, which is what those letters stand for in that
Sure.
initialism there.
Right.
So, yeah, so let's go ahead. Do you have anything else before we dive into our topic here?
No, I think this topic's going to be big, so let's go ahead and dive into it.
Okay, very good. Yes, I agree. Okay, so DEI has been making the news lately as one of the recent political straw man being attacked by conservatives in the search for another culture war boogeyman. And I think as we unpack this, we'll really try and highlight. I think the point will become clear, but I want to I think say up front that I don't think that the initiatives against this are actually, I don't think they care about DEI that much. But they tend to go after anything that has an anti-racist slant to it, that has a name, and then they just make that a fear-mongering talking point among those politicians. So wokeism, again, like we did an episode on this, it's not what they are talking about it as, and even they like greatly misconstrue it. And it's like essentially the idea, of course, is similar to with DEI, affirmative action, DEI. What was another one we were talking about earlier?
Uh, I don't remember.
Damn it, I thought I had another one. Um, that doesn't matter. Beep. Yeah, wokeism, DEI, it doesn't matter. Like if there was a name and it has anything to do with anti-racism, then they are attacking it. And again, I think it's just because They can get people riled up about it. Critical race theory is another one. Like it has a name that they can turn to and get people fired up about it without people understanding what they're worked up about. So it just gives them that culture war boogeyman to inflame and incense people about.
Right. I think now is a good time to unpack the history of DEI so we actually understand what it is, how it works, and what will happen when it's gone. As Abraham said at the beginning of the episode, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's an informal name for a series of initiatives that have gradually evolved over decades following John F. Kennedy's 1961 Executive Order 10925, which mandated that federal contractors should take, quote, affirmative action to ensure that applicants are treated equally without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin, end quote.
Yeah, so this was right during the civil rights era, and at the time, money and power was primarily concentrated in the hands of able-bodied white men with little melanin, beep, in the hands of able-bodied men with just very little melanin in their skin who appeared to be of European descent. And if that
Sure.
sounds like an absurd way to decide how to concentrate power, it is. Before there were laws against doing so, employers, colleges, landlords, hospitals, the military, the government, and other institutions could refuse employment, admission, medical support, safety, fair treatment, and promotions toward people who had more melanin in their skin or appeared to be not of European descent or who were not men, essentially.
Right. And that's not to say that things have gotten better since then. Like that, those problems still exist, but at least there are currently some protections in place, at least to some degree, to prevent that from being as overt as it might have been previously. And we've still got a lot of work to do, but I think it's important to know that like we have come quite a ways
Yeah.
since then. And so I think it's just kind of important to know that we're not there, we're not where we need to be. We have moved forward a little bit.
Yeah, I think it was taken for granted that that's just how things were. That it was just like that power was concentrated in the hands of those people, and that was just how things were. And this sort of switch to say like it's probably useful to have other ideas in these spaces and to have people who come from different backgrounds and who have different histories and who have lived experience who can also participate in these sort of decision making and innovation systems in our culture. And so there were these policies that essentially said like let's include them too. And as you said, I mean I would make the case I think that it has improved tremendously since the 1960s, but we've
Sure.
never actually gotten to equality. We've like made
Right.
some progress, we've made some steps and we'll unpack those, but we've never actually gotten to the point where like the it is a level playing field.
Right, exactly. So there are a couple, I think, important acts that came out that were initiatives that helped prohibit some of these discrimination issues. One was the U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964. There was also the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Equal Opportunity Act of 1972. And all these initiatives were designed to prohibit discrimination in employment, colleges, housing, hospitals, and all other institutions. So basically, these were anti-discrimination acts that were designed to protect folks that were historically being discriminated against.
Yeah, and so before these types of laws existed that would prohibit that kind of discrimination, businesses, colleges, etc., they could choose to not hire people based on their skin color or based on their sexual orientation or their disability or their gender or their sex or other heritage they might have. And it was completely regardless of their qualifications for participating in those institutions. Like even if they were extremely qualified, if they were a woman, they might not be allowed in. If they were someone who was gay, they might not be allowed to participate in those spaces. And even if they were hired in those spaces, those businesses, those institutions, they were not required to pay those people fairly or give them the chance at promotions in here. So women were denied entrance to colleges or graduate programs because of what was between their legs. Even if they were like top academic performers, they were prevented from entering higher education. People of color struggled to find employment because of the melanin in their skin, regardless of whether they had years of experience and training and demonstrated high amounts of aptitude aptitude. So there were laws that essentially there were not laws that prevented that kind of discrimination, and there were strong candidates who could not participate because there were not laws that protected that kind of protected against that kind of discrimination.
Right. So even in the rare places in which a minority group had managed to gain power, they could also discriminate against able-bodied white people who were just looking for work. Not that that happened very often, or it did, but they could if they wanted to, without laws preventing them from doing so. So basically, any of these spaces, any of these employment spaces, college, even people applying for health insurance could be denied based on
That's
any
right.
number of these factors that were simply just factors that they were born having.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah, great catch because yeah, that even access to basic things like insurance, just as you were
Or
saying,
hospital
like
care. Like
yeah, or
people would get
medical
turned
care.
away from hospitals. Yeah, they would be
Yeah,
turned away because of their color of skin or because of who they were.
or because they brought ads.
Oh, damn, that was good.
We don't turn away from the ads here. We apparently let them in, and maybe we should rethink that policy. But here we are. Um, all right. So essentially, here what we have is that the people who had the power, they feared losing that power, and they feared losing it to people who thought differently from them, or even if they didn't think differently from them, they just looked different from them. And so they railed against these new laws. They falsely accused these acts of forcing them to hire unqualified candidates. They preached that once these groups, who at least appear different to them, gain any power, that those groups would continue to strip away the power from these non-disabled white men in charge and replace them with people who they believed were incapable of succeeding in those roles. And so it essentially here was just people who were born with an advantage, maybe into a wealthy family. They were white. They were like in an area that was had a lot of resources. They essentially were afraid that by letting other people in, they would not have those advantages anymore. And instead, they would be flipped. They would then end up with the disadvantages, the wrong side of the
Right,
tracks, if you will, that they would be the
right.
ones who are like suffering in those spaces. So it's kind of almost ironic that they're acknowledging the systemic problems that exist and fighting to keep them in place so that they don't land on the other side of them while arguing at the same time that they don't exist.
Right. Yeah, that's the whole thing that always gets me is like, oh, well, what's the problem? Why would that be so bad? Oh, is it because that you've taken advantage of all these folks for all these years and you've maintained power and like suppressed large swaths of people, large groups of people? Oh, is that what it is? Oh, you don't want to admit that, but that's it. Yeah, it's the amount of mental gymnastics that somebody has to go through to make the
Yeah.
argument for that is astounding to me.
Yeah, you have to you basically have to admit that it's a problem to acknowledge that you're concerned about ending up on the short end of that stick.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So, all that to say, I think it's important to point out that this is a bedrock principle of conservatism. It's not the only thing in conservatism, but it is a core value
A thing.
inside of yeah, it is a thing and it is a core value to reduce the diversity of ideas and opinions and to concentrate power in the hands of very few. We see that when they dismantle university programs and say that universities and education will indoctrinate people. Education
Yeah.
doesn't indoctrinate people. Education educates people. And it just so happens that more educated people tend to vote differently than conservative views. But well, that's a different story in a different day. A common strategy is to advertise some scare tactic that minority groups are to blame for things going wrong, even in situations that have nothing to do with these marginalized groups.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just to prevent any kind of diversity of ideas from existing, is to try
Right.
and promote homogenization toward a small group of people's idealized version of what a system of community should look like.
Hmm.
Now, Nevertheless, these marginalized groups, they organized and they fought for rights and for protections. They protested, they wrote to their representatives, they ran for office, and they argued that they at least deserved a chance to participate in jobs and education, the military, to have access to medical care. What craziness is this? And with bipartisan effort over decades working on these issues, they did make progress toward this end.
Right. So in the 1970s, we saw rights expand for women, and the first employee resource group was created at Xerox.
Yeah, in the 1980s, it had started to include a recognition and initiatives to protect people in the LGBTQ plus community. But not only that, it was also people in religious communities who may have otherwise been discriminated against: Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, Christian,
Yeah.
Mormon, even, like those were also people who benefited from initiatives to include people from various communities in those and protect them from like bias and discrimination.
Right. I mean, that's the thing that I think people miss is like, when there are like anti-discrimination policies in place that protect religious freedoms. It doesn't just protect people who are different than you. It also protects you who might identify as Christian or Catholic, who is like maybe somebody who feels like, the world is maybe out to get you, and that Christians are being persecuted on like some absurd level. But it is a protection as well. Like somebody can't say, "Oh, you're Christian. Oh, I see that you have a cross tattoo. You can't work here." Like
Right.
like they can't do that to you too. So it's a protection for you, the person in power, and it's important to recognize that. Anyway, it's funny that people can't see that type of thing. So in the 1990s, companies started creating specific positions dedicated to creating policies tailored to their company's needs in support of providing equal opportunity and inclusion for marginalized groups. And the Americans with Disabilities Act started finally improving accessibility for the millions of Americans with various disabilities, including injured veterans. Now, I also want to point out when we talk about this timeline, this is within our lifetime.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
within our lifetime as we're talking. This is not historical. This is not B.F. Skinner teaching pigeons to guide smart missiles during World War II in the 40s. Like, this is in our lifetime.
Yeah, this is not even boomers. This is millennials essentially, because yeah, the
Yes.
most of what we've described so far has happened since we were born. And we're not that old. I
Yes.
mean, we're kind of old, but we're not that old, you
We're
know.
not that old.
No. I mean, I'm getting gray hair, but I started getting gray hair in my like late 20s. So,
Yeah.
anyway, um yeah, so as these programs grew and they started to spread more, people became increasingly aware of other issues that might exist in some of these shared spaces. And it became important to start considering things like a higher need for sexual harassment policies so that it was less likely that people could be sexually abused with power imbalances that exist. They started recognizing it was important to be considerate of other cultural practices, that people from other places might think and do things a little bit differently, and that as long as that's not harming anybody, like that should be okay. And that includes, again, like even people with religious backgrounds who maybe they would like to have a prayer room or something. And so they would set aside
Mhm.
a place for them to worship if they wished. And again, just in general, being aware of our biases to help us treat one another better and be treated better ourselves. Like that was another outcome of some of the push that was happening during this time.
Right. So in the 2010s, businesses actually started using DEI processes even more, and those businesses that were using DEI outcomes and objectives and different systems were actually outcompeting others and saw real benefits of a diverse work group or workforce, I should say. There were improvements in morale, creative problem solving, innovation, and broader appeal to a greater number of consumers. Their workforce and their pool that they were able to hire from expanded exponentially. Workplaces thrive with diverse crews of employees, with diverse people working in these spaces.
And in the 2020s, where we find ourselves now, at least at the time of us recording this, who knows when you're listening to it, as attacks on marginalized groups had been sharply increasing and a global pandemic nearly crippled the entire world economy, desperate social movements such as hashtag #MeToo and hashtag Time's Up and hashtag Black Lives Matter, they were sort of attempting this grassroots campaign to bring further awareness to the increased division and the apparent rise of bigotry to power. And I think that the fact that there was so much momentum behind these policies should have actually been a red flag to everyone that fascism was just on the doorstep of many countries, especially in the United States. Like the fact that we even had need for something like that showed that we were not out of the woods on these issues, and in fact, we were rapidly retreating toward the Dark Ages.
Yeah, people were radicalizing for sure. So in 2025, as felon, con artist, charlatan, Nazi, and rapist Donald Trump was sworn into office again, DEI has been rapidly dismantled in situations around the country, in institutions as well, in around the country. So in a move to avoid political targeting, several major businesses began canceling any and all DEI initiatives that they had created. These companies include, but are not limited to, Pepsi, Disney, Google, GM, Meta, Ford, GE, Target, Chipotle, and PayPal.
And also probably by the people who are paying for these ads.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we're just sort of walking through the history here of all of this, the ramp up through various initiatives that are part sort of form the basis of DEI, and what has happened more recently. So we're sort of now up to the present here on January 29th, 2025, just 9 days after being sworn into office and just a week after firing the entire Aviation Security Advisory Committee. A Black Hawk helicopter collided in midair with a passenger plane in Washington, D.C. And this killed, I saw various numbers on this, so I'm not 100% clear on the numbers, but the one I saw the most often was that it killed all 67 people that were aboard both aircrafts. And the belligerent dumbass, Trump, attempted to blame the crash on everyone he didn't like. Blamed it on Democrats, on Joe Biden, on Barack Obama, and on DEI, saying, quote, "We are all searching for answers. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity inclusion hiring initiatives." And that was almost exact quote. I messed up a little bit in there, but like he did use the
He doesn't
incorrect
use those
article
big
there.
words.
um, and when pressed for evidence of this, he reported it's common sense. So they asked, "How do you know it was DEI?" And he says, "Common sense." To be clear, DEI initiatives did not cause this crash, and as I mentioned, he had recently fired the entire Aviation Security Advisory Committee, as well as many other airline officials that had belonged to various aspects of air travel, and people had resigned because of him and his policies, who were also in that space. And there was a tweet that claimed that they had fired 3,000 employees. It looks like that has not been substantiated, so I'm not clear on that part. But there was a lot of laying off, and it was already very short staffed. Like they were struggling to have enough people to work as it is in air traffic control. So that many people leaving obviously did not help. But here he is blaming it on people with disabilities.
Right. And honestly, like it's just disgusting. So I think that's where I can leave that part. I mean, there's going to be more information that comes out about this, I'm sure, about causes and stuff like that, but it is not DEI. Because
Yeah.
the thing I think that people like the argument that they seem to be making, and we'll talk about counter arguments and stuff like this later. The argument is that they're just hiring anybody because they have a disability or because they're hiring. Let me be clear. What they're saying essentially is they're hiring unqualified people
Right.
because what makes them unqualified is their disability, and that is not at
Yeah.
all what is happening.
No.
That is not at all what is happening. They're hiring people who are qualified and also have a disability. They may
Right.
have something else going on, and so I think it's really important to kind of clear that out. So that
No,
brings us
that
to
is. A great catch. Yeah, you're exactly right. That it was it the underlying assumption here is that these are people who could not do the job correctly, and it was because they were unqualified, and they were unqualified because they had some disability of or one of of some or some they were in some other way unqualified. But that's not at
Right.
all what was actually happened.
Not even close. Not even close. So this brings us to the point where we've been talking about DEI and kind of what it means at this point in time, but we haven't really kind of unpacked exactly what it means. When we talk about this, diversity refers to the participation of individuals with a variety of backgrounds, including people who have been marginalized or underrepresented. Equity refers to equal access so that opportunities for people are fair, just, and impartial. And inclusion means that people in that environment are treated with respect and dignity and are accepted. So DEI's primary purpose can be categorized or characterized as ensuring that every qualified person in an organization, company, school, or office is treated fairly and has the opportunity to fully participate, regardless of their background or identity. And if you are concerned with DEI, which part of that do you strongly disagree with? I mean, that's the point that I would make here is like, do you disagree that people should have fair opportunities? Do you disagree that people should be treated kindly and with respect and dignity? Like, what part of this is the actual issue here? Because I
Right.
would imagine that the issue is not DEI. The issue is that you are not qualified enough to compete with a diverse workforce.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you hear this, and it's like as we mentioned, this not only like an outcome of this could mean that there are people who are black or indigenous people or from other countries or who speak different languages that participate in those spaces, but it could also mean that there are places where people who there might be someone who is atheist who runs a company who then hires someone who's Christian and does not make them feel like they don't belong there because they are Christian. It could mean that they onboard people who are from rural communities, even though they're in an urban setting, because they want to have the opinions of people who also live in urban areas. Like these initiatives also support that. Like they include people from all backgrounds and walks of life and protects all of them. And so it's not just that it is people of color to the exclusion of other people, and particularly of qualified candidates. It is find the most qualified candidates. Don't be distracted by the fact that they have a name that is different from one you might otherwise recognize, or
Right.
other features of who those people are. Um, yeah. So I think there are some counter arguments. There's a lot they kind of overlap with one another. We've mostly said what they sort of are, but we'll I think unpack a little bit some of the counter arguments here. So I think unfortunately initial attempts at affirmative action, they didn't know what they didn't know. I think they didn't necessarily know what they were always incentivizing. And so there were a couple of missteps that happened early on. Specifically, without clear direction, many places took affirmative action to mean X% of your workforce must be minorities. And the resulting consequence was that they essentially would have what they were sort of colloquially described as racial quotas. That was like, we need to have, 5% of our employees be black. So just like hire up until you get to that 95%, and then the last 5% make sure they're all black. And there were several court cases that began to come out of these sort of policies, and that more clearly shaped affirmative action policies and discouraged this whole idea of like racial quotas. And the whole idea of racial quotas have since been prohibited by the Supreme Court, but also like it's just helped direct better, more appropriate ways of thinking about affirmative action in DEI, which is and I didn't really plan to talk about this, but like one of them is they have tried to take on some um, types of hiring practices where they don't see the name first. They just see the resume.
Right.
And then they just look through essentially what their qualifications are. And then they decide based on that whether they're going to bring them in for an interview. And so they don't actually know anything about their race or their sex or anything else. They just see what their qualifications are. And that alone reduced inequality so much that they wouldn't even need something like racial quotas because there were really qualified candidates who were otherwise not being chosen because they had a name that sounded like a minority name or it was a woman or something like that.
Right. I mean, I think we talk about that on an episode. We talk about that on the Names Matter episode.
Oh,
There's one
yes,
that
we
we
did.
do
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
we
right.
do talk about that a little bit. Yeah, because that was a pretty important study. It was pretty wild.
Good reference.
Yeah. Now, others argued that affirmative care, or affirmative care, beep. Others argued that affirmative action resulted in discrimination against white or otherwise advantaged groups. And there very well may have been some instances in which white people who have had a hiring advantage due to being white, but have been outperformed by a person of color or a different sex and felt that they were being discriminated against. That could have happened. But the whole point is that the hiring practices are fair and inclusive, and DEI policies frequently spell out strategies for finding qualified employees without being distracted and dissuaded by the fact that they may have come from a different background.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is to try and level the playing field. And I think we talk a lot about hiring practices as this pertains to business, but again, this actually is across the various elements of society because it is inclusion for acceptance to schools, it is access to medical care, it is access to financial services like money, like getting loans by banks, getting insurance. Like there are so many different places where this could be a factor that affects the extent to which someone would be facing problems because not of anything they've done or any lack of things that they have done, but because they are in some group
Right.
that those people have some bias against for whatever reason. Like maybe they're profoundly against the Irish, and so they see O'Malley come through and they're like, I don't know about that person. We're not hiring them.
Right.
So
Right.
anyway, another counter argument that I saw. So I think largely those kind of represent the bulk of them. It's usually things like it ends up being that they just focus on hiring people because they're black or Hispanic or whatever, which is that has been done away with a long time ago. And then there's the argument essentially that they are hiring unqualified people, which is not true. Like that mostly there's no real evidence that that has happened. That mostly seems to be a scare tactic. And then the other one that's sort of unique from those two is that some argue that with how society has gone, that these types of measures just aren't needed any longer. They're unnecessary. We are past the point where they matter. Despite the fact that if you if you look around at all, the majority of CEOs, doctors, and professionals at the highest levels are still primarily white, straight, cisgender men. Not
Right.
exclusively, but primarily. And like even
Right.
the initiatives that exist in places like hospitals still find that with those initiatives, they're still struggling. I say struggling maybe isn't the word. They're not really fulfilling on the promise of ensuring that there are a relative distribution of qualified professionals that represent different backgrounds, including just like white professional Christian women are not as well represented as white cisgendered men.
Right. And so you're going to see that across the board. I mean, we both work in behavior analysis, and you could see that in most of the programs that we see for conferences and who's working in research spaces. Like you see
Yeah.
that quite a bit, that there is a discrepancy where it is, a lot of, I always kind of say it's like there's a lot of older white men that are doing a lot of speaking engagements. And so it's just important to note and to maybe kind of figure out some ways to do better with that. Something
When
that
I
happens too.
started I mean it was a long
Go ahead.
time ago, but when I started my master's program, it was mostly women. And when I started my doctoral program, it was mostly men.
Yeah.
And so I think that speaks to where the allocation of people sort of existed. And I think there were a lot of reasons for that. And I do not blame the people at the institutions who are making those decisions. But I think that there had sort of culturally been a push toward what maximum level of achievement was suitable for certain people, that
Hmm.
sometimes they internalize that idea thinking, well, this is as far as I need to go because I'm a woman. Or sometimes it was so difficult that like only people who had the most advantages were likely to try and push through the obstacles that existed. I don't know. There are a lot of reasons I think, and I don't think there was a lot of intentionality behind the people who made the decisions there, but those were the spaces where I found myself. And I just thought it was an interesting thing to observe where I'm like, we went in this space predominantly with women at this level, but at the next level up, it completely flips, like literally the opposite.
Right, absolutely. Speaking of intentionality, here's an ad that we intentionally are taking a break for so you can hear.
Nice.
Thanks.
All right. Research time.
Yeah.
Okay, we have been talking about, well, we were just sort of unpacking some of what might be considered counter arguments, I guess. But let's start digging into, I think, the sort of real world impacts and consequences and what's going on here. And I think we'll start by understanding what happens in places where DEI is specifically included, and the research has been done to look at what happens when you do that sort of thing.
Right. And so I think this is probably my favorite part of the episode because I think that you and we share, I mean I say probably. We share, I would say, the same values almost across the board, like almost entirely.
I think so.
And so with that
Except
being
I like
said,
mustard.
I think you don't like, yeah, you like mustard, I don't like mustard. That's an entirely, that's the division of our podcast. But I do think it is important to know that like what we're going to try to do here is actually just explain actual peer-reviewed literature that explains why this is a good thing, not from our personal perspectives or our biases, but understanding what the research is actually saying about this. So that's where we're going next. And so this is what really happens with DEI. So in a paper, a 2023 paper, Edmund Flammer and Glossner in the National Bureau of Economic Research conducted a study of companies boasting as being among the best to work for. They reported that firms with DEI were financially stronger, were more growth oriented, had higher future earnings, higher valuations ratios, and tended to have greater representation of women in leadership positions. DEI did not change stock market performance, either up or down, and research and development professionals with DEI policies had higher and improved innovation than those with less or no DEI.
Yeah, so they implement these policies and these businesses are more financially well off and more competitive. That was a thing that happened.
Right.
There was a 2023 Pew Research survey that was just asking people about how they felt about DEI, and they found that the majority of workers surveyed supported generally DEI initiatives. They regarded them as helpful, important, and necessary. However, they also reported that these opinions did tend to skew in a partisan way, and they were generally viewed more favorably by women and people of color.
Weird. Like I could see a bunch of white dudes going, "No, I don't like it."
Yeah, that's kind of
But
how it
that's
shook
essentially
out.
what that's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Now,
no,
oh,
you go
sorry.
ahead because
Okay.
I know you've got a lot to say about this one.
Yeah, well, and I didn't actually write anything down, so I set you up to not necessarily know how to segue into
Yeah,
it.
no
So,
worries.
um, beep. Now, another thing that's happened real again, we're sort of talking real world consequences here. So the current push is eliminating DEI. That's like what the current administration is pushing for, what's going on. And so there was recently, just like maybe a week ago, a list of trigger words that people who are writing grants should avoid using, lest their grants be audited and potentially rejected. And the list here is crazy. So when just for people who aren't aware, when you're trying essentially to get a grant, you are going to write what you're trying to do with that grant, who the grant is for, how it's going to succeed, what is the whole point of that grant, right? Where did I put my list? Sorry, I had that list written down somewhere. I don't know where it is.
It's a long list.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Washington Post.
Where are you, list?
Oh, here it is. Okay. Beep. So like when you're writing these grants, like You just have to describe what you're doing. You're usually like it's some kind of grant that usually includes people in some way, and so you're going to talk about it. And important note here about maybe like government censorship and what that should be, because a lot of these are research grants that are funded by the government. That they fund a lot of different things, research, medical research, social science research, all kinds of things. And so here's a list of words that you should not say lest your grant be targeted and potentially rejected. It is activism, advocates, advocate, advocacy, barrier, barriers, biased, biases, bias towards, BIPOC, Black and Latinx, disability, disabilities, diversity, diverse community, discrimination, equality, equal, equitable, history, historical, female, gender, diversity. Oh, I said that one. Hate speech, excluded, minority, Hispanic, inclusion, equitable, inequitable, LGBT, marginalized, multicultural, like race. Like you can't say words like this in grant applications. Like that's insane. That's insane. A lot of those are
Right.
words that out of context have nothing to do with politically charged topics. Like you can use them in a lot of different ways. But also they're just saying like what you can write is white man's penis and that will be fine. Anything else we will not accept.
Yeah, exactly. It's for an administration that has spent a lot of time talking about freedom of speech and all this stuff, they certainly don't like people saying certain words.
Yeah, they are very against speaking freely. By the
Yeah.
way, Justin, if you could put sort of like one of those fun, I don't know, I'm thinking like 1950s sort of like like they're listing things and there's just sort of playing that almost like elevator type music. While I'm listing things, that would be fun if you can. Otherwise, it's fine.
That'll be good. All right. Beep. So, despite the effort put toward increasing DEI initiatives, many researchers have found that the actual implementation of DEI has been limited, and that many spaces simply check the boxes for DEI on their paperwork without actually having invested time or energy into any of those programs. So basically, it was they were throwing up a green flag saying yes, we're doing this, but they weren't actually being intentional about any of the changes or any of the systems that they had promised to engage with. They weren't doing any of those things, which is kind of an unfortunate thing. That's not all places, but there are some places that just kind of checked the box and accepted the grant money or accepted whatever it was and just kind
Yeah.
of like, marketed that they were doing DEI, but weren't actually doing it.
Yeah, I think the performative activism piece without actually doing anything about it is just as bad as supporting like anti-DEI initiatives
Right.
because it dilutes what that initiative is intended to do and represent anyway so substantially that it actually almost backfires in a way.
Right.
So that is definitely problematic. Okay, again, real world consequences here. Quick facts that most people in the United States will know, but I'm going to say it anyway in case you just make sure you're really clear to set up the next point we're going to make. Rural communities in the United States almost universally support the Republican candidate, and they were instrumental in putting Trump back into office the second time and in putting him into the office the first time. And ironically, rural communities will suffer greatly with the elimination of DEI initiatives.
Right. So DEI initiatives pushed universities, including Ivy League colleges, which we talked about on our Ivy League episode. They pushed these Ivy League colleges to accept people from rural communities who did not come from wealth, who did not have access to private preparatory academies, who did not come from a legacy of Ivy League alums. Even though wealthier people in urban areas had more resources and greater access to education that technically made them stronger candidates for Ivy League colleges, DEI programs saw benefit in including people from rural communities with different backgrounds, so specifically ensured that they also received opportunities for education despite not necessarily being as competitive as candidates who had greater resources. So what we are saying here is that DEI initiatives are not solely race or gender. They also include socioeconomic factors to eliminate issues of classism. Do people who
Yeah,
would have had the opportunity to go to even a community college have access to these colleges as a result of what can be described as DEI initiatives that ensure people of all socioeconomic backgrounds can also have a fair shake at getting into education systems and further advancing their careers.
that's the equity part of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean arguably the inclusion part as well, but I mean like the part where we're making it as available to all as possible. And there's more to that too, which is that rural communities almost by nature, they tend to have fewer things like fewer infrastructure supports like roads. Like they have a couple of main roads or highways or whatever. They have less access to services sometimes, such as medical care. And DEI programs have invested in programs and institutions to ensure that they could send doctors to reach rural areas or have them be available via telehealth. They made sure that they had access roads, or they even just improved the roads in general so they were more resistant to extreme weather, and that supported transportation infrastructure that allowed for more emergency vehicles to make it out to those communities. They would also build
Right.
partnerships within those communities between them and the more urbanly located providers in those rural communities to ensure that they had access to just basic services that they should have a right to. And so without those programs, without these DEI initiatives, people in rural areas are likely to have less access to very basic things as simple as groceries, education, medicine, and emergency supports. And they largely voted for this. They voted for that outcome.
Right. Um, Now, the majority of voters over the age of 50 also supported Trump's reelection in November 2024. Older people also have a history of being pushed out of employment or struggling to find employment due to their age. And DEI programs specifically aim to include older folks in the workplace and support them in other areas. Without DEI initiatives and DEI protections, that's another way to look at this too. It's not just initiatives, it's also protections.
Yeah.
Businesses are free to use discriminatory hiring, promoting, and firing practices and kick older people out of employment just for being older. What they deem to be quote unquote too old, they can just remove people from their positions because they are too old for that position. DEI policies would have protected and included older people, and they also voted it away.
Yeah. So I guess as a takeaway, if you ever wanted to fire or just not hire someone for being a Republican or being a Trump supporter, now you can. This
Yeah.
discrimination against Republicans brought to you by Donald Dipshit Trump and the Republicans in Congress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so DEI programs do not just benefit small minority groups, they benefit everyone that's involved, anyone that participates in the system, in these organizations, in these institutions. And when everyone is treated equally, when people are given an even playing field, everyone benefits. Everyone, every single person benefits from this. We
Right.
succeed as a species when we can lift each other up, and DEI is not the problem, it is the solution to all of the things that are going on. Inclusion, making sure that everybody has a seat at the table. It's so, or the majority of people. We talked about this on the episode. Maybe Nazis don't get a seat at the table, but like
Right.
everybody else can have a seat at the table. And it's really important to be able to have all of that together so that we can actually uplift the species, uplift our communities, and uplift our neighbors and our friends and the people that we care about.
And yet DEI is not necessarily perfect. Like there is room for improvement here. And ideally moving forward it will be better and better. But you can't improve it if it's gone. And what they're trying to replace it with is just nothing bigotry, I guess. Like it is replaced by a big nothing burger. And
Right.
what happens in that space are the things that were problematic that resulted in those programs being initiated in the first place. So like this is just the the direction that would make sense to go is to like if there's a problem with DEI, we bring people to the table to discuss how we improve the system, and we want to have like voices at the table. Like that's the whole thing. And the
Yes.
opposite of that is kick voices out of the table. One rules all. Everyone shut up and listen to that person. And I
Which
don't
has
want to live in that
historically never
system.
worked.
No,
It's
it never
historically
has.
never worked. We have seen it demonstrated time and time and time and time and time again. Dictatorships and people like consolidating power into a single person has never worked.
Yeah, we talked about this in our episode on royalty. And it's just like these are unsustainable systems. They collapse under the weight of their hubris. And the fact that they are built on a lack of diverse ideas. That you have one person who's not being questioned, who makes terrible decisions because they only surround themselves with yes men and people who refuse to criticize anything they do. They quash dissent, they squash innovation, they squash criticism, and those systems fail. They fail because
Yep.
they cannot succeed without people pointing out the flaws. And so
Yep.
that is what happens when you take those guardrails down.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that is what we have to say about DEI for right now. And so here is an advertisement that is happening.
An advertisement.
Yeah. All right, we are back, and so when we record, we like to wrap our episodes up by recommending some things. Sometimes it's movies, or music, or books, or TV shows, or activities, or life hacks. Who knows? We just recommend something that we feel like we want to recommend, and it often is unrelated to our topic at hand, and sometimes it is related. But before I do that, I need to get through the credits. And again, I would like to say, if you are joining us for the first time, I hope you made it all the way through, and I hope that you enjoyed what you heard today. And if you did and you would like to support us, you can join us on Patreon. If you do that, you'll get access to behind the scenes content, ad free content, some additional bonus goodies, all that kind of thing. And I also will read your list on these full length episodes that we publish that come out every Wednesday, and say a big thank you to the people who help continue to allow us to be a show. And that is Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, and Kiara. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we love you so much. We love you to the moon and back.
Indeed, the very real moon. And thank you so much to my team of people who help make this happen. Writing and fact checking from Shane and myself. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson, and our musical and sound producing engineer person in the chair is Justin, who is very, very good at this and helps
He's so
make it
good at it.
sound like I am not in a ball full of marbles, which is, I guess, what it sounds like when I record sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think you sound like that, but Justin does a great job of making sure that never happens.
Indeed, indeed. So, anyway, if you would like to tell us about your thoughts about DEI or anything else that we have talked about, or if you just want to reach out and say, hey, you guys are great, we're good with all of that, you can email us directly at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com. We're also on the social media platforms. I'm particularly checking out Blue Sky right now, is where I'm spending my time.
Hmm.
Although I
Yeah.
do feel like I can maybe go over to Meta and just make some wildly inaccurate claims about Mark Zuckerberg, because apparently you can say whatever you want over there now.
There's no
And
rules.
there are no rules. There are no rules, which means there is no value. But let's go
Yeah.
make fun of him for that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you can reach out to us. We'll try and talk to you on those places. We're happy to hear from everybody, and we like hearing from you. But before we move on today, let's recommend some things.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to recommend a thing that is relevant to the topic at hand. I have been trying to, as I post things on social media, include hashtag DEI in everything I post, regardless of what it is. I am hoping to just kind of mess with the people who would see these kind of things and flood the ethernet, the sphere, the internet, the ether sphere. I don't know what to call it. Flood the zeitgeist with the word DEI so much that they can't even get their heads on straight. So I'm recommending you join me in that. Just whatever you post, it doesn't matter what it is, just include DEI, just to troll them a little bit, just to mess with them, because they deserve it, because they're being jerks.
They're being jerks. You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm going to recommend a something that is getting a lot of criticism for being considered DEI, but is absolutely not. It's just a good movie, and that is Captain America's Brave New World. This is the
Ooh,
new Captain America movie. I saw it yesterday. It includes Anthony Mackie as Captain America, which is he's great in it. And I
I love
love it
Anthony
because
Mackie.
he's so good in it, and he is he's a Captain America without a super soldier serum, so it makes
Right?
him even more relatable. Harrison Ford is great as Thunderbolt Ross in this. There's a lot of really good surprises in it that are really cool. I just thought it was a lot of fun. It was just a really great political thriller that also included monsters and space things.
Fun.
Yeah.
As all good political thrillers should.
Duh. Duh.
All right, fun. I'm excited to check that out. Well, if you do decide those check those things out or attempt to take on posting DEI and everything, you can let us know about it. We're happy to hear from you. I also didn't say this, but you can leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find us. Click on those 5 stars. That just makes the algorithm like us a lot. And then, of course, leaving a review means that more people see that and they're like, "Ooh, I'll check that out." But if you don't have time
Mhm.
for that, I understand. It's totally okay. Most of the time, I think people find podcasts via word of mouth. So if you like to share us, you
Yes.
should just tell somebody, and then they'll go check us out, and then all the good things, and we appreciate it. But I think that that is all that we have to say about this topic for now, and about Captain America. Is there anything you would like to add, or anything that I forgot before we wrap up today?
Be good to each other.
Indeed. Yes. Be good to each other. I agree. Good.
Yeah.
Good closing words. All right. Well, thanks for
Yes.
listening. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya. All right.
Woo! Under an hour. When was the last time
That's
we did that?
wild. That is wild. I was thinking that as we were getting closer, I was like, that doesn't even make any sense.
Unwrapped DEI in less than an hour. Would they be proud or disgusted?
Oh, I think somebody will have some thoughts on it.
Indeed, indeed. Uh,
All right, cool. What mini are we recording? Are we doing musings or are we doing the locus of control?
I forgot about locus of control, so I prepared musings.
Oh, okay, all right.
Whoops. Um, all right, we should end this for patrons, and we'll talk about this really quick.
Bye, patrons.
Bye, patrons.